This is the second in a short series of quick videos I'm making to explore some of the drone regulations that regulators in New Zealand have proposed. Today's episode is on remote ID. Remote ID isn't one specific technology. It's been defined in different ways by different regulators, so it's often difficult to know what is actually being proposed in detail. But in a broad sense, whatever the technology, it's where a UAV transmits its identifying information and current location. Some technologies use the internet and require a cell or Wi-Fi connection to work, and some use a direct radio broadcast. Some regulators allow a mix. The most common arguments for remote ID are that drones are connected to cell phones or other devices that can connect to the internet, so sending the owner information and current location is straightforward. That drones that don't do this can carry some module that does. That it can help avoid collisions with manned aviation, or that it can help with prosecutions of drone operators threatening or spying on people. That if you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear. So we'll look at those arguments, but first let's look at what's sent. The location is obviously the most important part, as this is what's presumed to keep aircraft safe and allows public complaints to be narrowed down to an individual drone based on area. Sounds good so far. But how does remote ID keep aircraft safe? Actually, this is less clear than you might think. Manned aviation already have their own remote ID system, ADS-B, and their own traffic avoidance system, TCAS or ACAS. Pilots have an information-dense environment already and won't desire nor be expected to add to it. So perhaps air traffic control could use it. Except ATC can't see whether a UAV is flying shielded below the top of nearby objects, so the number of false alarms is likely to be staggering. And so ATC will generally avoid looking at the information either unless they have a complaint. And how does remote ID narrow down public complaints to an individual drone or owner based on the area it was reported? Well, first the exact movements of every UAV, from $20 toys to $100,000 heavy delivery drones, must be tracked and stored. Next, the exact time and location of the complaint must be compared to this database of UAV motions. Now authorities must contact any UAV owner that was flying in the approximate area in the approximate time frame of the complaint. Then the authorities presumably confiscate their UAVs and show them to the complainants, to whom "it has propellers" is enough to confirm the identity of the UAV. Meanwhile, the UAV actually involved, a handheld electric Black & Decker weed eater unseen by the complainants, continues to terrorize the neighborhood. Much like the case of the model aviation enthusiast caught up in the mysterious Gatwick incident, accused due to being on a register showing his location being near the airport, it was a case of wrong place, wrong time, and later proven innocent after being dragged through the mud. I guess that means the location actually isn't that useful and in fact could be harmful. So if we don't need the location, then what about the owner's identity? I refer back to episode 1 on registration, where we found out how little use there is for this information either, and in combination with the Gatwick incident, again, it could even be harmful. As far as arguments go, we're down to the two "but it's easy" arguments and "nothing to hide, nothing to fear." So let's look at how easy remote ID is to comply with. First and foremost, let's consider the elephant in the room, DJI drones. These are in a class I like to refer to as semi-autonomous, auto-hovering GPS camera drones. They are not so much flown as programmed on the fly. Stick inputs on the controller are simply suggestions as to where the drone should go. These drones have software running on a tablet or phone which manages their flight settings and displays their camera feed. So yes, when an internet connection is available on that device, they can perform remote ID with relative ease. But an internet connection isn't always available. Many tablets don't have cellular data. Cell phones can be put in aeroplane mode or simply run out of data. Drone pilots might even just be trying to fly out in the middle of nowhere with no reception to capture the stunning scenery New Zealand has to offer, as the Colmar Brunton drone survey indicates they want to do. And the general public feels is completely reasonable. So even with remote ID turned on, DJI drones can't guarantee they will actually deliver it. And that's with an almost monopoly power in the consumer drone market and a strong incentive to deliver coming from the previous FAA pressure. So what other technologies exist? Primarily, the radio broadcast options in the market are FLAM and ADS-B. As I said, manned pilots don't want drones cluttering up their systems, so ADS-B is out. That leaves FLAM, which even at its least expensive costs over $600 for a full transmit and receive license, and requires other additional hardware be added to UAVs to support it, and some technical expertise. It can also be disabled at will. To sum up, that's the "but it's easy" arguments dismantled, only the nothing to hide one left. UAV pilots have nothing to hide, sure, but that's because our UAVs can't hide. There is no such thing as a quiet drone. No avoiding the fact that drones sound like flying weed eaters. Model aircraft can turn off their engines and glide, but unless they're in thermals, they can't glide far, and they're too high up to spy. They also are fairly easy to spot, even with the motors off. With the exception of long-range and semi-autonomous drones, it's difficult to imagine a scenario in which they can't be followed, a likely landing site found, and the pilot caught should they be misbehaving. I should also point out that at least for FPV or first-person view pilots, these craft broadcast their camera feed, which can be picked up by anyone with an appropriate simple video receiver. Most FPV pilots set a craft name or pilot handle, which can be read right off the video link by anyone interested. So it's not that UAV pilots generally have objections to broadcasting a remote ID of sorts, it's that the technological solutions given by regulators for doing so are not fit for purpose, and these pilots in the community have never been consulted on ways that they actually could send out some form of remote ID. The FAA in particular actively worked against the hobbyist and pro communities by introducing an anti-tampering provision that made it impossible for scratch-built UAVs to comply. Of course, after this video, maybe you won't feel as strong a sympathy for remote ID regulations. We haven't even talked about one major tentpole of the remote ID discussion, and that is UTM, or UAV Traffic Management Systems. The regulator's stated goal of working towards integration with a UTM means that they are likely in a headlong rush to either step up the AirShare system into a full UTM, or more likely to sell it and contract out to market. Probably one of the usual suspects for UTM, namely Airbus, AirMap, Amazon, Intel, OneSky, Skyward, or Google's OpenSky by Wing. Given the trial rollout of AirMap in previous years, this seems like a frontrunner, though Wing, a division of Google's parent company, and Amazon are surely also interested in being paid considerable sums of money to control New Zealand's skies. So what is remote ID for? If it's not there to prevent collisions with manned aircraft, and it's not really useful for predicting privacy or preventing incidents, why bother? We can only make educated guesses at why the regulators want it, but in this case it seems there is only one purpose: feeding into UTM, to allow larger and more dangerous drones to fly in the sub-120 metre airspace and avoid coming into conflict with smaller consumer-grade drones. The thing is, I believe this is totally backwards. Dinghies don't sound foghorns to warn tankers of their presence. Dinghies are expected to listen, look, and keep out of the way. Better yet, dinghies and tankers are expected not to be in the same shipping lanes. Large commercial delivery and transport UAVs should not be in sub-120 metre airspace, except when taking off or landing vertically onto well-defined takeoff and landing zones, which recreational and professional UAV pilots should avoid flying over. It is the large vehicles posing grave risks that should be transmitting their locations, and frankly, the risks to a large, potentially autonomous UAV in sub-120 airspace of unseen, uncharted hazards are far too high. So to summarise, I believe we've established here that remote ID is not nearly as useful as it's hyped to be. And really, that the only edge case in which it's useful is one that isn't even off the ground yet, and may never truly come to pass given the difficulty of aerial delivery and transport to built-up areas. It's likely being pushed to move towards an expensive and frankly more dangerous UTM environment of mixed purpose sub-120 metre airspace, instead of qualifying large delivery and transport UAVs as full aircraft in 150 metre plus airspace with all attendant safety checks and airworthiness requirements. Let's ask for honesty from regulators as to why they're pushing this when the costs of compliance and of moving to UTM are so high. Thanks for listening, and subscribe for the next episode.